Welcome back to the best of Sega, where we celebrate the very best games from the very best games company. With the Sega Master System turning 40 years old this year, it felt like we should be celebrating one of its best games from its most famous franchises. While with Shinobi Fever taking hold, given the new entry to that series that just launched this year, that franchise too deserves attention. But what if a game existed that blended a Master System icon with Sega Shinobi? A game that merged two franchises to create something fresh and new, and that delivered one of the best games on the Master System. I'm Dan the Mega Driver of the Sega guys, and this is Alex Kidd in Shinobi World. In 1989, Sega closed the door on the Master System in Japan as it was superseded by its 16-bit successor, the Sega Mega Drive. In the US, meanwhile, while Sega of America had been focusing on the Mega Drive, they had also received the rights back from Tonka to distribute their own Sega Master System. With the console being a success in Brazil and Europe at the same time, the console was refreshed as a budget option in North America at just $50, with that new look system coming to Europe and Brazil a little later. So, whilst Japan had turned their back on the 8-bit console, it still needed games for the regions where it was still in production, and thus there were still teams in Sega of Japan producing software for their Western counterparts, especially with sales gaining further momentum in Europe and Brazil. Announced in March 1990 was a title called Shinobi Kid, with the screenshots at the time depicting a young ninja in a blue gi battling a boss called Mari-O, clearly inspired by the first boss Ken-O from the first Shinobi, and of course a parody of Super Mario. Little else is known about the development, and unfortunately at present no prototype exists in the public realm. The game was developed by R&D 2 in Japan, the consumer development division that Mark Cerny called the Sweatshop, due to how fast they had to crank out Sega Master System titles. By 1990 though, Sega's consumer development teams had grown significantly, and the development time for this particular title took a little longer than the 3 months Cerny cited. We can assume that the Shinobi tie-in was due to the Master System port of Shinobi being one of its marquee titles, and the kid aesthetic used to target younger gamers after the US launched the budget-friendly Master System 2. At some point in development though, someone at Sega must have realised, hey, we already have a kid character, and the game was altered to make use of the Alex Kidd brand, altering the sprite very slightly on the Shinobi Kid to better resemble Alex. Alex Kidd in Shinobi World launched in the summer of 1990. Specific release dates aren't known, which is mostly the case for video games of that era, especially pre-Sonic Tuesday, but the reviews for the game started appearing in magazines from July. Master System gamers were treated to a melding of two of the console's most iconic properties, since this was pretty much exactly what it says on the tin, an Alex Kidd adventure in the vein of Sega Shinobi. The game starts with Alex Kidd in his usual red jumpsuit, standing in a field of flowers with his girlfriend. Kind of awkward, but happy. You know, when you and the missus run out of things to say. Thankfully, he's rescued from this uncomfortable moment by a mysterious entity who steals the would-be Mrs. Kidd away. But, like all men, he realises that male loneliness is more distressing than conjugal discomfort, and he weeps. That's when a mysterious ghost intervenes, explaining that the Dark Ninja has returned and stolen Alex's main squeeze, though he doesn't really elaborate why.
My goals are beyond your understanding.
So he imbues Alex with his spirit, making him grow several pixels taller and wearing the gi of 1987's Joe Musashi. The intro out of the way, there's no options, you just hit that start button and you go straight into the action. Probably the first thing to hit you is the visuals. They are easily some of the best on the Sega Master System, or they would have been up until that point at least. Colours are bright and bold, the backgrounds and sprites are detailed and well animated, with a great chibi style that is consistent throughout the game. Personally, I think it actually looks a little like something that you would see on the PC Engine at times. Obviously nowhere near that level in colour, but visually I don't think it's far off something like the first Bonk on the TurboGrafx. This is heightened by the fact that there is very little, if any, of that patented SMS sprite flicker. The visuals remain solid throughout. Sound too is solid. The effects work is fairly standard Master System fare, the hit sounds are quite light and airy, a few plinks and plonks depending on the enemy and the weapon. Music though is excellent and really encapsulates the vibe that this title is attempting to communicate to the player. The stage themes are bright and breezy, there's nothing really foreboding or epic here. Much like the Alex sprite, the music just seems to be always cheery, with some exceptions such as the boss battles, which still aren't massively ominous but are at least a little more serious. Most of the game's soundtrack leans on one motif, and long-time Shinobi fans will have recognised it immediately. It's the most famous stage theme from Sega's 1987 classic. Of course, it's a lot more light and up-tempo, and it does feel like the kids' cartoon version of an adult live-action movie soundtrack, and it works wonderfully. The boss theme too is borrowed from the original Shinobi, but it's nowhere near as oppressive as I mentioned. Music is, unsurprisingly, not the only thing that Alex borrows from the Shinobi series. I've already mentioned Alex's sprite, which is a dead ringer for the 1987 Joe Musashi in his dark blue gi, as opposed to the white and red attire that Joe would wear in later games. Enemies are also borrowed heavily from the original. We have the beefy ponytailed thug who lobs boomerangs at you, you've got the sunglasses sporting soldiers, assorted colorised ninjas, and all the bosses are lifted right out of Shinobi's Rogues Gallery. Gameplay though is actually rather different. Alex starts out with just his standard katana, button 1 slashes and button 2 jumps. Beyond that, Alex can do all the usual stuff such as crouch, but he can also wall jump, a technique that Joe Musashi wouldn't demonstrate until Shinobi 3. Alex's final move is also my favourite. He can climb various poles from ropes to lampposts, then spin around until he becomes a fireball, soaring across the screen as if his name was Johnny Storm.
Sorry, what now?
Through the game's 4 worlds, Alex will find chests that bestow various items and boons. A power sword gives Alex's katana a large arc of light to its attack, expanding its power and range. The kunai pickup gives Alex range attacks, similar to the original Shinobi. There are of course hearts and extra lives to pick up too. It all plays brilliantly well, fast, fluid, and a melding of Alex Kidd's platforming sensibilities and the action of Shinobi. Even the stages are often lifted right out of the original Shinobi game. You have the streets at the start with plenty of callbacks to the first 2 acts of the original arcade title. Then there's the dock section in Area 2, which is almost beat for beat a match for similar areas from the original arcade game. The third area is probably the most original, but even that has callbacks to missions 3 and 4 in the 1987 game. Then Area 4 is once again heavily influenced by the final mission in Arcade Shinobi. That said, there are still original ideas in each area to differentiate them. Each area has 2 acts and a boss, and it's the second areas that usually stand out, whether it's the scaffolding section in Area 1 or the underwater section in Area 2. The bosses though, as I mentioned, are parodies of the original Shinobi game. Kabuto, the first boss, is a parody of Ken-O from the first Shinobi, but also Mario as we saw in the preview, because not only does he fire his projectiles like Nintendo's plumber, but he also shrinks when he's damaged. Heli is a parody of the Black Turtle boss, whereas instead of a helicopter that drops off ninjas, we instead have a flying Mandara face, that being Area 3's boss, that then spits out mini helicopters. Lobster is of course a parody of Lobster, but in this case rather than a samurai, you now get a crustacean, and when you beat him, he lies down covered in butter like a delicacy. The Dark Ninja meanwhile is almost identical to Shinobi's last boss, the Masked Ninja, with the same attack patterns aside from missing the final phase of his arcade counterpart. Alex Kidd in Shinobi World really is a mini Shinobi parody, with mini being the key word here. The game is actually pretty small, with only 4 areas, 3 acts each, and most of them being quite short. In contrast to the series that it parodies, and actually many Alex Kidd games themselves which are also hideously unfair at times, Shinobi World is almost trivially easy. The gameplay is simple, but that in itself isn't a problem, and to be honest, its jump and slash mechanics could be compared to Hollow Knight, at least the early stages of that game. But unlike that game, Alex Kidd doesn't challenge you to apply those moves to especially challenging situations. Very few scenarios require you to learn the enemy patterns or layouts. Generally, anyone with platformer experience should be able to make it almost all the way through on their first try. There is scope to explore and find all the hidden items, but then most of those are hearts to increase Alex's life bar. and when that bar is at its maximum, those hearts turn into extra lives, meaning you can easily come to the end game with an abundance of 1-ups left. The Dark Ninja at the end is probably the only real challenge, but if you've managed to best his counterpart in the original Shinobi, you'll have absolutely no trouble here. And that brings us back to the fact that the game is very light, content-wise. You can see this game through from beginning to end in about 25 minutes, so it's quite simple to blast through this one in just an afternoon. It's a shame because everything else is so very good. When I first played this game as a kid, it was when my little brother borrowed it from one of his friends. Once I started the game, it was pretty much love at first sight. Of course, even back then I was able to finish it, yet despite that I've always returned to it. There's no high score system, there's no secret endings, nothing to entice you back, except one thing. And that is that it is a wonderfully fun ride while it lasts. The presentation is some of the best on the Sega Master System. The gameplay is brilliantly responsive and fun, and I think you just can't play this game without having a huge smile on your face. This melding of Sega properties is probably the first purely fan service game that I played from Sega, and probably one of the very first from the company. That it lacks the content and challenge does bring it down somewhat, as even kids, likely the target audience for this game, could finish this one off without much trouble. If you paid £30 for it back in the day, you might have felt a little bit ripped off. Yet even today it sells for a good chunk of that in the second hand market. And I suppose that's because the quality of the experience shines through. Alex Kidd in Shinobi World is not your next obsession. It's not the game you're going to be grinding for the next few weeks. It's not the world you're going to be painstakingly exploring, trying to uncover every little secret. But it's simple premium entertainment. It's like your favourite episode of The Simpsons or Friends, or that 80-minute mindless 80s classic movie that you've rewatched 100 times simply because it brings you so much joy. It's that love and nostalgia over substance, and when it's done as well as Alex Kidd in Shinobi World is, sometimes that's all you need. This has been Dan the Mega Driver of the Sega Guys, and I will see you on the Sega side.